Welcome back to our PCS Grades weekly webinar. I'm so excited for today's interview, so we are going to jump into it. PCS Grades is all about helping military families to make their PCS move go a little bit better. So whether you're moving across town, across the country, or around the world, PCS Grades has the resources to support you before, during, and after your move. Our weekly webinars bring experts to you so that we can address your PCS questions and get you the answers you need. I'm Lizanne Lightfoot. I'm the content editor at PCS Grades. I'm a Marine Corps spouse, mom of 5 kids, and a published author. And as a military spouse, I've done 6 moves. So they have been a wide variety of fun and experiences with our 5 kids. And this is my beautiful co-host, Tessa.
Yay! I'm Tessa Robinson, and I am irrationally excited to be with you today because I love Corey Weathers. I'm a guest content creator for PCS Grades, co-host to Lizanne Lightfoot, and a recovering bureaucrat. I spent 15 years with the federal government, and now I don't do that anymore, so I can spend more time with my 2 kids. And we are so pumped for today's webinar. Lizanne, tell us who we have.
So for those of you who do not know our guest today, this is Corey Weathers. She is a licensed professional counselor. She's a military spouse, and she is just a woman with a beautiful and wonderful heart. So I'm so excited to talk today about maintaining mental health during a PCS move.
She's also very fun to ride in a taxi cab with, which I experienced multiple years ago. Corey, we're so excited to have you on tonight. Rather than me give the litany of your accomplishments, which I would actually love to do, but I think that'd take over the full hour that we have today. Tell us a little bit about yourself for the viewers at home.
Oh, guys, I am so happy to spend some time with you. And you mentioning the taxi cab in DC, Tessa, like I long for human connection. And I know everybody is longing for that too. Like it has been a long couple of years, and so many have moved in those few years of COVID and lockdown and isolation and just so many things changing. I know we have as well. Some of you maybe are preparing to move. And so I know everybody is probably watching this going like, man, those were the times, right? To be all together. And I think it'll come back in a different way. So my name is Corey Weathers. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I've been doing counseling or providing counseling for 15 to 20 years now, 15 of those years being mostly with military and first responder families or couples. A lot of marriage work, I think, is my kind of sweet spot, but I understandably see a lot of military spouses because I am one. And I know that we need a lot of love out there. And so we are currently stationed at Fort Hood. We asked to come here to Fort Hood to have some stability. So when it comes to PCSing, our family has moved on average every year and a half. And so it really came to a place where we knew we needed some stability for our mental health, for our kids' mental health. And I know that's something that we're going to be talking about today is the importance of your mental health and also taking a look at your family as well. It's such a huge topic. So it's an honor to spend some time with you guys. I think it'd be great to just dive in because, yeah, there's a lot of things. I'm not here to really talk about myself, but really, can I just say, if you guys are watching live, throw some questions into the chat because I can see the chat and I'd love to engage in that conversation with you. And don't be afraid to ask a question or make a comment. And I'm so glad that you're here. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you encouraging those questions because we do have a beautiful prize to give away to our viewers today. One lucky viewer is going to receive a wellness basket, which we have just assembled all kinds of stress reducing products, a weighted blanket, some anti-anxiety coloring books, just some really fun and beautiful things. And we want to gift that to someone to help them to relax, to take away their anxiety. And the way that you can win that basket today is through the comments. So we're going to be entering names throughout this live webinar. Anyone who's asked a question, given Corey a shout out, responded to something that she's saying, we will be recording those names and doing a giveaway live at the end of the show. So Tessa, what do you want to ask Corey first?
I have so many questions, Corey, but first let me just give a shout out to the weighted blanket, which is like sleeping with a giant hug. So definitely want to comment because if you haven't slept with a weighted blanket, you're missing out. Corey, we hear the phrase mental health all the time now. I mean, we really do. How do you define mental health and in what ways does it relate specifically to the stresses of PCSing?
It's such a huge question, right? Like, what is mental health when we talk about it? And I was thinking about this before we were logging on and thinking about how the best way to explain it is I kind of like to think in buckets or baskets, if you will, right? And just maybe categories. And so I think there's the mental health that we most of the time think about, where it's like, where is my mind? How does it feel healthy? Do I have healthy thoughts? It's that anxiety, even though we feel anxiety in our body, a lot of times it is sometimes coming from our brain and sometimes it's coming from our emotions. But it is just whether or not you feel like you're in a good place, and I think that's okay for us to think about mental health from that perspective. And we're going to talk later about stigma, right? Because sometimes when we say mental health, it's really scary. Like, do I have good mental health or do I not have good mental health? And what does it say about me if I don't have good mental health? And the truth is that we're human beings and every day is different. And especially if you have kids and a family, your family or one person in your family can be off on any given day. And so I think we have to just accept from the beginning that our mental health changes or can change every day. So I think that there is, in one basket, there is what I would like to call situational mental health. There is life happens, stress happens. What's my reaction to that? Do I feel like I'm knowing how to react? Do I feel like I know how to cope? Do I have the capacity or the skills to cope well? And then what can I do about that, right? And then I think there's this other basket that we tend to jump to, maybe attach a stigma to, which is a little bit more of like the physical complexity of mental health. And there is things like your hormones being off, your physicality, the chemicals in your body or your brain struggling to fire, right? And so that's where we get into some of the mental health side of things, where even if we have all the coping skills in the world, we might find ourselves struggling a little bit more. And I can't tell you how many people at some point in their life, if not multiple times in their life, find themselves in that basket where they go, hey, I think I need a little bit more support than I can do on my own. Where medication might be an option for you. And so I know it's scary to think about that, but it's hopefully we hope to reduce that stigma a little bit today. So when I think mental health, I think there's the situations, there's kind of the daily stuff. Am I in a good place? What can I do about that? And then there is the mental health that's a little bit more chemical side of things in our body that we can try as we might try to do a lot of things, but we might need some extra help to help settle what might be going on in our mind or in our body.
Yeah, I love how you're trying to separate the situational from the chemical and physical, because I think all of us, when we're moving, we just know that PCSing is going to be stressful. So we accept that as this is normal. Everyone goes through it, right? And I think what we struggle with is trying to figure out how long should it take to adjust mentally? And how can I really tell if I or one of my family members is struggling more than they should be, or needs to take a step back, or really needs a little bit extra help during a PCS move?
Yeah. So first of all, moving and relocating is a huge life change. We would liken that life change to having a child, losing a family member, going through something traumatic. Like, it is a huge life shift. Just because we do it more frequently than maybe civilian families may or may not, doesn't necessarily mean that we should just get used to it and it shouldn't stress us out. Okay. So it is a life shift. You are uprooting, and you are probably, if you have kids too, you're uprooting their lives as well. And everybody's going to have a reaction to that. So it is definitely stressful, and we're definitely going to have a response to that, both physically, emotionally, in our minds, socially, how that impacts us as well. And so let's just acknowledge that it's a huge thing. And so one of my favorite memories that kind of helps me cast vision in order to answer this question. I remember a professor of mine, this was way before we joined the military, but I remember and I think about this all the time. You've probably heard me mention it before somewhere, but I remember she passed around this, it was almost like a survey where you like, how many big life issues have you gone through in 6 months? And they were supposed to like tally them all up. And then, whatever your result is at the bottom, like you're in the red zone of too much stress, or like you have a little bit more margin than you maybe think that you do. And I think back on that all the time, because as military families, we are constantly absorbing very major life stressors, relocating being one of them. So if you are going through COVID or you're having a child and you're moving on top of that, right? That is a lot of stress to happen all at once. Of course, we're going to struggle a little bit. Let's say you've already had a child and your hormones are still rebalancing. That is still something stressful that we have to recover from. So signs to look for. First of all, I just want to say, whenever we do have a big life shift, we've got to give ourselves some buffer. We've got to give ourselves some time before that life shift and after that life shift to kind of recover, reset, do a good assessment on how we're doing. By the way, this applies to a deployment too. That's a major life stressor. There's got to be that buffer of how am I doing before? And then now that we're in reintegration, how are we doing? We need some time to assess and reset, right? Moving is the same way. And so give yourself that buffer. Take that time to assess, how am I doing? Am I short? Am I irritable more than usual? Of course we are, right? Of course we're going to be short and irritable because our whole life has been disrupted. But the question is, what is that? Is what is coming from me? The energy that's coming towards my family and how I'm coping with this life change. Am I being the person that I want to be? Right? Like, I think that's a good self-check. Like, am I speaking to my kids the way that I would want to speak to my kids? Am I speaking to my spouse? Am I speaking to myself the way that I want to be speaking to myself all the time? And sometimes that's a good sign of how are you doing? Right? I mean, just the other day, I made a remark to my 17-year-old and he had this look on his face like, would you like to try again? Because that did not come out the way you meant it, right? And so sometimes, like the instead of being defensive, seeing the mirror that is your family and your relationships in front of you to give you kind of a little bit of a sign of maybe how you're doing is a good way to kind of assess that. So I think overall, some big kind of red flags, some things to be looking for is irritability. I know most people, this is a very frustrating thing about moving, is we tend to lapse on our personal goals during that move. We stop eating healthy. We stop pursuing that race that you were training for, or whatever that thing was that you were doing that was going to be for your own mental health, the hobby that you really enjoy that brings you peace and joy. It disrupts your entire routine, and that routine is meant to bring you peace and joy. And so when you have kind of not had that for a long time, you're going to feel a lack of peace, the irritability. You're going to have weight gain. You're going to not feel well because you're probably not eating as well as you normally would. But if we find ourselves bickering, not getting along with each other, if you're seeing irritability from your kids, from your spouse, which I think is probably going to be 100% of the time, that's usually a red flag that, hey, time out, pause. Let's talk about what we can do to get back in sync in a way that kind of sets us on a different trajectory. So if you have questions, let me know. Some of this you guys know, right? Like, of course, your sleep is going to be disrupted because you're not in the same place that you were in before, right? So there's always going to be some red flags. But if you're really speaking two different languages with your spouse and you feel like you're speaking two different languages with your kids, you're just not in sync at all. And it's starting conflict that's not getting resolved. And we're just carrying it from day to day. That's a huge red flag that we need to interrupt that trajectory and figure out how to get back on a healthier path.
Oh, Tessa, you're muted. It always happens once.
There's somebody just got a bingo on their bingo card for muted. Sorry about that. So Corey, thank you for that advice. I mean, that's fantastic for what to look for. What are some of your favorite evidence-based ways to improve mental health during a PCS or just in general?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm seeing in the chat, some of you guys are already asking great questions of like, how do I help my teenager? How do I help my 12-year-old? And what about a 2-year-old, right? So, to answer this question, I see that word evidence-based. And usually when we use that phrase evidence-based, it just basically means that there's research or there's some level of like, somebody's done some deep dives and some digging to see, does this actually work? Is there actual improvements, or is this just a best guess and an assumption, right? So first of all, I want to say that there are some research-based things that we know that reduce our anxiety, that help us get plugged in, and I'm going to cover a couple of those things. But I just want to first acknowledge that we all individually know and have these kind of tested, proven things that we know in an evidence-based way works for us individually. Like each of you probably know, or maybe this is a good question for you to start asking yourself, like, what are the things in my life that have worked and have not worked? That you can be, in some ways, evidence-based into what works for you in your own life and finding that your own evidence of what works for you, right? So while somebody like Tessa, who's an extrovert, right, probably needs to plug into community really quickly. There's I'm making an assumption on that, Tessa, but like there's tons of research that says you cannot do this by yourself, right? We shouldn't be trying to do it by ourselves, which is why all of us are longing to be in close proximity again with people. Whether you're introverted or extroverted, community is very important. So while Tessa might say, I need to get settled so that I can get out there and find my people, there might be an introvert like me that's like, I need to find my routine and I need to pick up that hobby. Or, for me, running is my mental health. Like I know when my brain starts to feel scrambled, I need to go for a run. And it's the cheapest EMDR out there, guys. EMDR is evidence-based. You find it in therapy. It is just basically your eyes moving back and forth while you're processing your thoughts and emotions. And guess what? It was discovered when the founder was going for a walk in the park. Okay. So going out in nature, going for that run where you are having like your feet moving back and forth, it actually stimulates your brain. It's free EMDR. So go for that walk, go for that run. Take those complex thoughts, all of the first draft of all of your irritability and your frustration and your anger and your, I don't know what to do with this situation, or I don't know what to do with my kids, or I don't know what's the right answer for fill in the blank. Go for that walk, go for that run, and it is free to you. Okay. So we know that community is huge and important. Nature is another one of those things. We know from research that 20 minutes is what they say is like, you have to get 20 minutes or more for you to have the benefits of it. And I feel like I've personally tested that in the last couple of years. Like there are days when I realize I haven't left my house in days, right? And when you move, that's what happens. Like how many of you, I'd love to see in the chat, how many of you do the whole, I know we do it, the whole get it all done in the first week, right? How many in the chat do that, right? Like our stuff is hanging on the walls by the end of the week, or we think that we're going to lose our mind, but we didn't even step outside. So one of the things houseplants, I love that, Stacey. One of the things I was actually just going to mention when we went to Leavenworth, that was a tough move. And I remember I had plants in the ground before the truck even showed up, because what I needed for me is I needed to get something in the ground that I had chosen, that I had said, this is going to be the place where I'm going to be. I'm making that choice. And by the time we got settled in the house, I was able to come back on the porch and things were already starting to thrive outside. And so it was just kind of like this boost of like, okay, maybe that's a symbol that I could thrive to. I just need to give myself a week. I need to give myself 2 weeks or 3 months. But,
they're literally planting roots at that location.
Yes. And so it gave me a chance to step outside and get that 20 minutes and like take a breath of actual fresh air, not filtered air, but fresh air. So, I mean, I could go on and on as far as like evidence-based, but you guys know, I'd love to see you guys put in the chat, what is the evidence-based approach that works for just you? Put it in the chat.
Those are really good questions. And I'm sure you're going to have some more coming in. Corey, you did us the honor of doing an interview previously with PCS Grades. And I think we just dropped the link to that in the chat as well, where you kind of elaborated on some of these strategies and ideas for families that are going through a stressful move. So can you just kind of summarize and talk to us about, any relationship, whether it's couples, whether it's your relationship with your kids, our relationships go through stress during a PCS. So how can we support each other as a couple, and how can we support our kids, especially those older youth and teens? How can we help our family members deal with the stress of a move?
Such an important question. First of all, I think it's about extending grace. I think we have to extend grace to ourselves, to our spouse,
and remember that our kids don't have the capacity that we have as adults, hopefully, to communicate well, right? And so I see there's already a question like, how do you help a 6-year-old prepare for a move, right? 6-year-olds are going to struggle with their words, and they should, right? And we tend to know that, but when we get into stressful situations, we kind of forget that everybody's at a different developmental stage, and everybody's also in a different place of processing this very big thing that's happening in our life, and everybody reacts to that in different ways. For example, I am the Strength Finder. Adaptability is my greatest weakness. And so it takes me longer than my husband to adapt to the new, put my plants in the ground, adapt, vision cast. And sometimes I have to go to him and say, please vision cast how all of this is going to be okay. Like, please remind me. And that's one thing that we can do, is lean on the strengths of the person that's in our home. And I don't think it's using our kids, especially those teenagers, to be vulnerable with our teenagers sometimes, to go, hey, you're really good at seeing like the silver lining. And I'm struggling with that today as mom. Like, what do you see that I don't see today? Right. And give them a chance to breathe life into your perspective. So when we talk about getting through stress, and we're all coming from different angles, and we're all kind of freaking out in different ways, there tends to be just a lack of communication or miscommunication. And communication, which is the biggest request in counseling, of how do we communicate better? How do we reduce conflict, which of course is going to happen during a move? To me, that is a question of connection. What's happening is I want better communication because I want to feel safe and secure and connected with this other person. I want to feel like I'm not the only one that is stressed, or I'm not the only one that wants things to get better. Or how do we communicate through this? Or how do we vision cast and get on the same page so that we're all not harboring cynicism and resentment during a difficult time, right? So one of the tools that I created after lots of speaking tools that I've tried out there, and there's some great tools out there, and I'm not saying that they're ineffective, because some of them are also evidence-based, but I find for service families, especially during a stressful time like a move, what you need is a quick in sync, on the same page. How do I communicate what I need? And I find that most of us, most of the time, have not even gotten to the point to figure out what we need. And so what we do is we all, including our kids, we loop in our thoughts and our worries, our emotions about the situation, and the facts of the situation. And then we replay that on loop over and over and over again. And anytime we are on loop, it turns into anxiety in our head, because it's never turning into a product that comes outside and then becomes productive. So I created the 5-minute check-in. They're going to put a link in the chat for you guys. It's totally free for you to download the 5-minute check-in. I basically took some of my favorite communication tools out there and combined some of my favorite pieces of it together and created what you can do in 5 minutes. It's wonderful to work with your kids. It's great with teenagers. It's wonderful for marriage. In literally 5 minutes, you can, and the whole goal, I'm not going to walk through all of it today, but the whole goal of it is for you to go through these 4 very easy questions in 2 sentences or less for each question. But the most important question is the 4th one, which is, what do I need? And that's the one that we skip most of the time. So being able to take this to your spouse and go, number one, I am physically exhausted and I feel out of shape and I've had too much sugar and too much processed foods. And I just am hating myself right now. And I know that's not good, but this is discouraging for me, because I was reaching some of my goals and now I'm just really having a hard time physically. Number 2, my thoughts lately have been I'm scared. I don't know if I'm going to meet new people. I don't know if I'm going to connect here. I don't know if I like the climate, and I'm scared and insecure. Number 3 sounds like emotions, but that's actually thoughts. Number 3 is your emotions. It's basically, I am overwhelmed and I am feeling insecure and I'm sad. I'm sad because moving is a form of grief, right? We've got to acknowledge that it's grief that we have to go through. And then number 4 is, what do I need? What I need is I need to get outside and I need to go for a walk. Can you watch the kids for just 20 minutes? And I think if I do that for myself, I'll be in a better spot. Or perhaps what you need is to ask your spouse like for some assistance. Like, I need you to just listen to me and like get a few things out, and then I'm going to feel better. But if you're working with your teenagers, this is fantastic to give this tool to your teenagers. Or maybe you don't give them the tool, you just memorize the 4 questions and then just in conversation, ask them the 4 questions. But giving your kids and your teenagers a chance to go, what I need right now is I need Chinese food, because every time we move, that's the first thing we get is Chinese food. We haven't done it yet. And like, I thought that was our thing, right? Or what I need is, can we just drive by the school that I'm going to go to? Maybe that will make me feel better. And so we try to mind read in stressful situations like this, when really just giving them a tool and giving them the opportunity to communicate for themselves is really what's going to help lower anxiety across the board. And then we can decide, do I help you meet that need, or is that need something that only you can do for yourself? And that's a very important question. Sometimes we don't need to be the answer for everybody. Sometimes we just need to empower them to go to their room and read that book or do that coloring book. Or I'm all for what Tessa said. The weighted blanket is gold. Absolute gold. I mean, there's been times that I've felt anxious. And I'm like, I'm just going to crawl under the weighted blanket for a little bit and just let it calm your nervous system. It does wonders. So I know that was a very long answer to the question, but hopefully that's helpful.
Absolutely. I think it's helpful to me. I'm learning a lot as I'm here with you, and I think it's definitely helpful to our viewers. We've had so many positive comments coming up. So thank you for sharing that. And we did drop the link to that tool in the comments. So such a simple tool, but I think it can make such a difference in our communication.
So,
and I'm sorry, Tessa, can I just respond to a couple? Sorry, I see a couple of questions that are specifically concerned about kids. So if I can just address, I know it's a huge topic right now, whether you have kids or whether you have teenagers. I just want to acknowledge that there's some wonderful, and yet I'm not trying to be discouraging, but some very real research that's coming out that our military kids are starting to express some understandable mental health challenges. And of course they would, right? Because our lifestyle is already stressful. When you add COVID on top of that and moving on top of that, our kids are going to struggle more than they usually do. So first of all, I just want to encourage you that that there is good research happening and that people are going to be responding with new programming, new opportunities. I would encourage you to use that 5-minute check-in, communicate with your teenagers regardless of their age, your children regardless of their age, giving them the opportunity to talk, find their feelings. Feelingswheel.com is a great tool that is also for free that you can pair with the 5-minute check-in to help, especially your boys, pick some of their emotions, because sometimes kids just want to say sad, angry, happy, mad, even though they already said angry, right? And so the feelings will help them expand on that. So I think there's some good things that are coming. But remember, Angela Duckworth's, I keep this in mind all the time with 2 teenage boys. Angela Duckworth's definition of grit is so much better than what we typically think of resilience. Resilience has this idea of like, we're moving, I got to go back to what I was before. Like, can we just bounce back? And I don't know about you, but I want to bounce forward. I don't want to return to who I was before, or I wouldn't be struggling right now. Like, I want to get better, right? So Angela Duckworth's Grit is her book, The Power of Perseverance. It's called Grit. She defines grit as not talent-based. It's gritty people are not especially talented, and they're not especially, they weren't born with something, unique, right? Really, it's just gritty people have the ability to see a long-term goal and are willing to endure the obstacles to reach that goal. And if our military kids are not gritty, they're gritty, right? Like, who else could be? And so we get to model that as family members. So remembering that as long as you know what your long-term goal is, and then we figure out how to daily endure what we need to endure, because that we value that goal so much more than the obstacles that are in front of us. That's how we develop grit. And that's how we develop amazing human beings, right? It's not without struggle and it's not without suffering. It is about, how do I endure the difficulty in my life because I have a long-term goal? So vision cast for your kids if they're struggling. Help them envision a long-term goal. Where do they want to be? What kind of friends do they want to surround themselves with? What kind of friend group do we need to shift because the first group isn't a healthy group, right? Vision cast because that's what they cannot do with their underdeveloped brains yet, is vision cast, and you can do that for them. Okay. Sorry, Tessa, go ahead.
I loved it. That's so helpful, Corey. And I love the idea of grit rather than resilience, or in tandem with resilience. I think sometimes, beyond vision casting and beyond, really changing your attitude and going back and getting it, sometimes we do have to recognize that it's time to seek outside help. I know for me, I went through a really hard time 3 years ago, found a wonderful therapist, and through the help of many antidepressants, I'm the happy person I am today. But sometimes you have to ask for help. And so can you tell us a little bit about, knowing everybody's different, but when do people need to seek outside assistance?
Yeah, such an important question. And thank you for your vulnerability in saying that. I know after my second child, I struggled with postpartum and went on medication myself. And I will never forget what the midwife told me at the time. Well, first of all, here were some of the warning signs I know that were in me that I often see in other people. Number one, when you have tried all of the self-care things that you can possibly try, when you have tried some of those coping skills, when you're, maybe you're trying to do what you can physically and you're going for those walks and maybe exercising and you're trying that, you're looking at your nutrition, like you're doing all the right things, or so you feel like you've hit all of those right things, right? But it's not quite helping. It's not quite doing the job and you're still really struggling. That is like one sign. And so I remember there's been many moments in my life, and I'll just be honest, last year was one of them for me. After a PCS during COVID and then going right into a deployment and then the Texas ice storms on top of that, I hit my own spot where I was so depleted and I was trying to do all the things that I could possibly do, but it just was not helping me out of it, right? So being able to go to your spouse, first of all, and say, I'm struggling. Like I'm doing all the things I know to do. I think it's good to go to your marriage and make sure that we're communicating honestly and be a human and be vulnerable, that you're not a superhero. You can't be great all the time. And if you're a military spouse watching, we tend to put a mask on and we don't want to admit that vulnerability. I know our service members do that too. But when it comes to like, we manage the kids, we manage, the move and the schedules and the school stuff and finding the doctors and all of that stuff, typically as spouses, and we put a mask on and say, I'll save myself for last. And that's when we know it all catches up with you. And then suddenly everybody else is doing great and you're tanking. Right. And so being able to say, I'm doing all the things I know to do. Now it's time to go ask for help is so, so important. So I want to tell you, the midwife said to me at the time, she's like, first of all, it's okay that you're doing all the things that you thought were going to work. And if it's not working in that situation, it was that B basket. It was chemically the hormones that were going on in my body. It wasn't going to shift without some support. And so she said, we're just going to like take a low dose of medication and we're just going to raise the ceiling of happiness for you. And I loved that phrase because that's what it felt like. It felt like this cloud that was just like pressing down on me. And I wanted to be happy. I desperately wanted to feel happiness, but it just felt like it was just really hard. It was harder than it should be, right? And so when she said that, it felt like, you mean I'm going to have just a little bit more room, a little bit more response time, a little bit more like breathing space? And that's exactly what it felt like. I didn't feel like a different person. I didn't feel, and everybody is different. So sometimes you have to figure out what works for you. But don't be afraid to go and take that step if you need to. I see we're already putting in the chat some ways that you can go and get some help. If you're okay, I'm going to jump into that. So let's talk about a couple places that you can do that. Number one, I agree. There is MFLAX and there is chaplains. Let me say a couple of things about that. Chaplains are 100% confidentiality, more than any clinician can ever be. As a clinician, as an MFLAC, any kind of therapy or mental health, we still have to report abuse, neglect, in some states, domestic violence. Chaplains, 100% confidentiality. So if that's something that you need, know that you can go to a chaplain, and they don't have to report anything. Obviously, if it's a safe situation, they're going to encourage you to take some healthy steps, but they don't have the same requirements that I would as a clinician. MFLACs are your embedded counselors that are usually on the installation. They're usually in the school systems as well, checking on your kiddos. Specializing in those adolescents. Reach out to your MFLACs in your area, especially for those teenagers, and say, my kid is having a tough time. Can you come have lunch with them in the school? Can you arrange for a military kid lunch once a month? They can do that in the schools. Even if you're on the installation and they're all military kids, they can come have lunch in the MFLAC's office and talk about coping skills and all kinds of great things. They don't take notes. It doesn't go through TRICARE. They are a wonderful resource for you to have that you can also use for your marriage as well. Very similar to
Can I
MFLAC.
just pause and clarify?
Please.
MFLAC is a military family life counselor, and they are embedded in the service members' military unit. So you find them through the base.
Yes, through the unit, but also know that if they're attached to the school system, they don't necessarily have to be attached to your unit for you to utilize them. So while you may have one that is embedded in your unit, and I highly recommend you reach out to them, just know that there are some other MFLACs, especially for your kids, that are available to you. Go through your school liaison, go through the installation, ask your school who's the local MFLAC that's attached to the installation. So thank you for that clarification. Sometimes you'll hear military family life consultant or counselor. They're the same thing. Military One Source is very similar to a Military One Source counselor, is very similar to these MFLACs, very similar roles, limited. If you need 12 sessions or less, just to do a good checkup, just to kind of reset a trajectory on where you're headed. Those Military One Source clinicians are great for just quick help, reset, and go on your way. A lot of those Military One Source clinicians are also your TRICARE clinicians that are available as well. They tend to do both worlds, but you can't go from the same clinician, TRICARE, to Military One Source and then back and forth. You got to choose one or the other. But TRICARE, a lot of people are struggling with TRICARE because their directories are a little bit sparse and confusing. That is a topic for another time, but I will tell you, a lot of those reasons why they're sparse is just because the counselors are struggling with the contracts with TRICARE, and getting connected with you as soon as possible. It's one of the reasons why I created the Life Giver directory. That's another link that's posted here, where I got frustrated, like the rest of you, trying to find someone that's culturally competent that understands our lifestyles. So the Life Giver directory is military spouses, veterans, civilians who have experience working with military families. Some of them are first responder spouses, but they're all clinicians that are culturally competent that you can reach out to. Last thing I will say about that, feel free to ask another question if I have not touched on something, but just because you see somebody in the state that doesn't feel like they're right down the street from you doesn't mean that they're not available to you. So many of us are doing telehealth now that you can get help from somebody telehealth, and they can be anywhere in the state where you are, and they can provide counseling to you if you are willing to do it virtually. So if you find somebody that you really like and they're like 200 miles away, but they're in the state that you're in, they can still serve you. Okay, so it's easier than ever to find somebody that is a good fit for you. And by the way, if somebody doesn't feel like a good fit for you, you've tried to work with them, I encourage you to go for a couple of sessions. It's like dating, okay? Give them a chance. Usually the first session, they need to collect a lot of information about you, and you haven't had a chance to ask them about them, right? So it's like dating. Give them a couple of dates before you fire them, right? But if somebody genuinely is not a good fit, my recommendation is first give them a chance to adjust, okay? As clinicians, we are taught that if I am not serving you well, my job is to role model as best as I can what a healthy relationship looks like. So if I need to change my behavior for you, or if I need to adjust my approach with you, I'd like the opportunity to try to do that so that I can show you people can change and people can adjust if you ask. Don't be afraid to ask them to adjust and try a different approach. I know I'm talking a lot here, but I just want to be vulnerable about every other assignment, which remember, we move about every year and a half. So So about every other assignment, I go get counseling myself. And every time I've gone to get a counselor, I've needed something different for that season in my life. And my favorite was I went one season where I was like, what I really need is I need a mentor. I need a female mentor in my life right now is what I needed. So I hope she's not watching, but I'm not ashamed of this. I actually went to a practice online and looked at their practice online. And I was like, I want the lady that has had the most experience, that is probably the oldest one there. That is the person I want to see. And I called them and they said, she's not taking new patients. And I said, she is today. She is today. She is going to take me because that's who I want to work with. And within a week I had a session. Okay. And it was the most beautiful experience because I knew I needed a mentor. And I walked in and I said, for the first 5 sessions, what I need from you is to just let me talk for 50 minutes straight and get it all out. You can get up and go get a cup of coffee and build TRICARE for it and come back at the end of the session when I'm done talking. But that's what I need. And so she just listened for 5 sessions, but you've got to, it goes back to that 5-minute check-in, right? What do you need? And can I communicate what I need to you so that you can win, right? So that was a lot. Is there anything I didn't cover, guys?
I have a quick follow-up question for you there. So, sometimes we do find phenomenal practitioners in our area, and then of course orders come and it's time to move. With licensing, I know it can be difficult to see somebody out of state. Do you have recommendations for how to pursue continuity of care?
Yeah, this is a great one. When you move, if you're talking mental health and counseling, and working with a therapist, a mental health counselor, they are licensed in a particular state more to protect you. They've agreed to abide by those state laws in protection of you, the civilian receiving the care. It's just like your doctor. When you go to that doctor, you want to make sure that they're licensed to practice in that state. And so when you move out of that state, you're in a different state with different rules, different laws. And so you cannot, let's say when I moved from Georgia to Virginia, I can't stay with my Georgia counselor because I'm no longer in Georgia, where Georgia can't protect me anymore, right? Now Virginia is there to protect me. And so that's one of the reasons why we have to now find a Virginia therapist, okay? So I know that that's frustrating. It's equally frustrating to be the counselor and the military spouse and have to switch your license or add new licenses along the way. So telehealth is a great option if you are in that state and you're moving around in the state. I know we went from, there's Fort Benning and Fort Gordon, and everything was in Georgia, and we moved like all within Georgia. And if I was doing telehealth, I could stay with the same person because I was in the same state. Okay. So if you have to move out of state, that is where we need to switch. Coaching is a fantastic option. And there are some therapists like me who have switched to coaching instead of counseling because it is a separate style. It is a separate certification. It is not counseling. I'm not diagnosing. I am not, we're not diving deep into your childhood. It's kind of like those MFLACs and those military one source. They call them consultants because we're not counseling, right? So from a coaching angle, there are a lot of therapists like me that now provide a secondary business of coaching. Now you can see them in any state if you're coaching and not providing the medical care of counseling. That's why TRICARE covers counseling and won't provide for coaching, because coaching is not counseling, okay? Unfortunately, it might be out of pocket, but if you find a really great coach that's worth it and you want to stick with them and you're willing to pay out of pocket, great option. Does not matter what state you are in. Okay, so great question. I know that's frustrating, but it's there for your protection and there for a reason. So ask for referrals. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable with other people and say, I'm struggling. Have you seen anybody? Do you know somebody? Ask for those referrals. Go to the Life Giver directory. If you don't see somebody on the directory that you've worked with before, please let us know so we can get them on the directory. Okay.
Corey, just to follow up, there's a quick question, and I think I know the answer to this, but we'll get it straight from your mouth. Are these people who can prescribe meds? A coach cannot prescribe meds, correct?
A coach cannot provide, yes, a coach cannot prescribe meds, and a counselor cannot prescribe meds as well. Psychiatrists can. This is a very important thing that I need to acknowledge. A lot of people ask, like, what's the difference between, right? So, and this is the one caveat that if you are needing to go to a psychiatrist and you're looking for medication where it's like a psychiatric evaluation, you might go to a psychiatrist who is a psychologist with an MD, right? Who knows all that medication and then neurology and all of that. And then you have a psychologist, and they specialize in evaluations. Like if your child needs an ADHD evaluation, if you need that next level of care for a bipolar evaluation, a psychologist can do that evaluation. TRICARE will ask you to get a referral for those from your PCM. But a counselor, a licensed professional counselor, a social worker, a marriage and family therapist, most of the time, you do not need a referral for those counselors. They do not prescribe medication. I can, though, tell you, the client, hey, I think we need to take a look at raising that ceiling of happiness. What if you go back to your PCM and see if they can help you with that? And if they can't help you with that, or if they feel like we kind of need the next level of evaluation, they'll make the referral to that higher level of care. Okay. Good psychiatrist, Courtney, would be talking with your PCM. They probably have a couple of them that they work with specifically. So talk with your PCM and they'll know exactly who they normally refer to. Great question.
And Corey, I just wanted to get clarification from you about where does Military OneSource fall into that spectrum? Because I know that's thrown out very often as, the first resource to turn to, and it is non-medical counseling. Is that the gateway before going to a counselor? Does it happen simultaneously? And can you use that Military OneSource counselor on the other side of a PCS move?
Great question. Okay, so Military OneSource, think of it as an additional service to TRICARE. Like the military gives you TRICARE for all of your medical needs, right? And so counseling and therapy is considered, behavioral health counseling is considered a medical practice, even though I can't prescribe medication because us as clinicians, we don't go through the medical side of education to do that. That's the psychiatrist, right? So in order for me to build TRICARE as a clinician, I have to give you a diagnosis. Just like when you go to your PCM, what's going on with me? I've got gastroenteritis or whatever, right? You have to have a diagnosis for TRICARE to cover it. Don't be scared by that, by the way. A lot of people are scared of that. Most of us clinicians, we hate that diagnosis thing too, that if it's not a legitimate, real, concerning diagnosis that we need lots of heavy treatment for, most of us just give adjustment disorder. It's the lightest diagnosis you could give anybody. And that is what we all as a culture can't seem to move on from. Adjustment disorder. So don't be afraid by that. Like we give you the lightest thing just so that TRICARE can cover it. We can move on to helping you adjust. Okay. Military OneSource is an additional service that the DoD has given you so that if you don't feel like you want to go to TRICARE and you're not needing ongoing, consistent, long-term care from a counselor, which you can go for 3 months and stop and then go back if you need to. But if you need something just like a lighter touch, the Military OneSource clinician, which again, a lot of them are also taking TRICARE, same skill set, just I'm providing through TRICARE and I'm also trying to help you through Military OneSource. But Military OneSource is like 12 sessions or less. I don't give a diagnosis. I have to take very minimal notes. And I'm just helping you through the life issue of communicating with your kids, struggling with what's going on with your spouse. And in 12 sessions or less, we think that we can probably resolve it. It's not something that we need to do a deep dive in. So great for if you get there, you just need somebody to talk to and vent, and then you think you're going to be well on your way. Tap into Military OneSource. You call them, they get some information. They find somebody in your state that can speak with you. And a lot of times they will keep you on the phone and they'll call the clinician and they'll say, hey, can you take this person? And then, yes, they can. And then they work it back and forth. And then suddenly you're connected and you're scheduling a session. Too easy. That's all you have to do at that point.
Awesome. I appreciate that. I've used Military OneSource before. I give it out as a resource all the time. And I love how all three of us on this chat now have, I don't want to use the word admitted, but just shared the fact that we've been to counselors, we use counselors, like there's nothing wrong with that. And it's definitely a useful resource. But as you mentioned earlier, there definitely is a stigma. There's sometimes a negative connotation in just seeking counseling. And so what would you say to people who are either kind of dragging their feet or unsure if it's something that, is it really that bad that I need to do this?
Yeah. And this goes to the comment that just came through that says, does that get you on EFMP status? Right. And I think that's the stigma that's also attached to this, which is, first of all, going back to what we said in the beginning, is that we're all human beings and we're all going to have moments of struggle, and you cannot do this lifestyle flawlessly without struggle. It is a roller coaster ride, just like life is always going to be. Life is always going to throw you something. Even if we weren't in the military, it would throw something at you, right? And we would still have to adapt, improvise, overcome. And we're not superheroes, as much as I try to talk and speak and encourage people to be superheroes. We are not that. Okay. So getting help is not going to put you on EFMP status. That is an entirely different approach. We are now an EFMP family because we needed a pulmonologist to help with our son's asthma. And we needed us to be relocated to a place or ensure that when we relocate, we have access to the doctors that can continue his care. Okay. There are a few very minor few people that if you have a significant mental health diagnosis that's in that B basket, right, where you are really having consistent care, medication management. We want to make sure you're not off your medication, because then you really do struggle. There are very few people that might decide to become EFMP so that they get the continuity of care for their mental health. So that is your choice if you want to do that. But you just going and getting your own care for mental health does not put you as an EFMP status. It just means you're doing proper self-care, and there have been resources that have been made available to you. Okay. So yes, EFMP does limit some places that you can go, but most of us who enroll as EFMP are choosing that for a reason. Okay. EFMP stands for Exceptional Family Member Program. It's for special needs. It's for special medical diagnosis. If you have a member of your family, whether it's you or someone else who really we need to focus on the mental health issues or the medical issues going, for example, we almost got stationed at Irwin, California, which is in the middle of the desert. And the nearest asthma doctor was 2 hours from that installation. It was not going to be a good place for us to go for asthma support, right? So it just keeps them from sending you a place that could cause more stress for your family. So it can be a really well done program. Going back to the stigma, I get a lot of questions of like, if I send my child to counseling, is that going to ruin their chances to get into the military? Okay. Your medical file, and this would be your medical file, and your kid's medical file are yours. It is HIPAA protected, just like your medical files when you go to the PCM. Okay. So this is a medical file, and the only way for that to be exposed is by subpoena. Okay. If you're in a court situation and the judge forces me, which I am trained to do everything possible to avoid that at all costs out of your protection. Okay. So we treat your mental health file as just as protected information as your medical file. Now, when it comes to future service in the military, if your child wants to be in the military and they have legitimate struggles, like asthma is one of those, right? And it's a significant issue, right? If it's a significant issue that could keep them from serving in a healthy way, in a safe way, that could also jeopardize the health of other people, they're going to want to make sure in those screenings that we're bringing in a healthy force. Okay. So that is part of every screening. If that person chooses, we're an all volunteer force, even though it doesn't feel like that sometimes. We volunteer to join this. And so if we're volunteering, we expose our medical files to join the force so they can do a proper screening. You getting just basic mental health care does not keep your child from getting future help. If there's a severe medical or mental health issue, that could come up, but that sounds like that's probably a proper reason for it to be screened and we take a look at that. But basic, just overall, how am I doing? How do I do better? If it makes anybody else feel better, I'm not ashamed to put out there, my 15-year-old is in counseling right now and he's doing wonderful. He's doing wonderful. He just needed another guy to help him deal with how do you be a boy, a teen boy, dealing with bullying, dealing with sports and my body, and how do I be stronger, and how do I, like, all that stuff that he doesn't want to bring to his parents, right? We said, you know what? We have been lecturing you and talking to you. I mean, the poor kid lives in a house of 2 counselors, right? And so if my kid needs help, any kid can go get help, and it's okay. Okay. It says nothing about me as a mom. It says nothing about me as a parent. He is writing his own story, and I want to surround him with as much support as possible so he can become the man he wants to be. Okay. So the last question on stigma that I will answer is, can I lose my clearance over going to counseling? A lot of our special operations ask me that as well. You know, there's a lot of role models and leaders out there that are saying, if you need help, go get help. You're not going to lose your clearance for going to get help. There's also a lot of embedded behavioral health that are available to those with clearance, that can go get the help that they need behind a skiff or with somebody else that holds that clearance so that they can freely process the things that they need to process. The only thing I'm going to tell you, and if you have a clearance issue or concern, your spouse or that whoever you are that has that clearance, that you're worried about that, you know what you can talk about and what you can't talk about. And those are probably not the things that you need to talk about in counseling anyways, right? You're going because you can go into a session and say, even something as simple as, I've had to see things and do things that I am struggling with, and I need the coping skills to work through it. And that's all the information we need to start. That doesn't mean that you've disrupted any OPSEC or put your clearance at risk. Okay. So we've got to reduce the stigma. The leaders can only do so much by shouting from the rooftops, go get help if you need to go get help. We don't need to feel alone, and we don't need more that are struggling with feeling alone that lead to suicidal thoughts, or, and that goes for you as spouses as well. Okay.
I appreciate you so much for saying all of that. And I think it is definitely something we're going to continue to talk about in our community, and something that we all need to hear. But we do need to wrap up our conversation today. So I know that all of you who have been sending such great questions and comments, we are going to be entering your names into our wheel of names to win a wellness basket. And I think my coworker has just sent that list of names over. So Tessa, are you ready to share with us who's winning a weighted blanket today?
I am. I'm so excited. But first, Corey, thank you so much. You're absolutely just such a bright light and remarkable for the entire community and just humankind in general. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. And thank you for all the comments and questions.
All right. Speaking of comments and questions, if you commented and questioned, it is now your opportunity to win a wellness basket. So I'm going to share my screen here. This is always, it feels like Christmas magic when it works. So here we go. Oh, we're doing it every time. All right, here we go. Click to spin. And the wellness winner is, it's still going. Yay, Emily McGregor. Emily, please message the page with your contact info so that we can indeed get that to you. Corey, thank you for being here. Like I said, I mean, I feel like there were 2 years there where I should have worn a t-shirt that just said sponsored by Wellbutrin. I was just raising my feeling for 2 years there. And, you know, sometimes that's what we all need. And there's no shame in asking for help. But thank you for being here. There's also great resources on the PCS Grades website, PCSgrades.com, with all of our blogs, reviews by military families, for military families, lots of your articles, Corey, that you've done for us over the years. So thank you for contributing. And Lizanne, any final thoughts before we close things out?
I just want to remind everyone to come back next week, same time, same place. If you were watching last week, you know that we had Brad from Charter Transportation, and you guys had so many questions for him that we weren't able to get to. We invited him to come back on the show next week, specifically to answer some of those detailed questions for the moving companies, and he's excited to be a guest again next week.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you then. It's amazing that he wants to come back because it's such an awesome audience. He's going to do it. So we'll see you all next week with Brad. Corey, thank you again. You really are a life giver, my friend.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you, everybody.